Welcome, everyone. This is Greg Rock, and on behalf of BPM Institute and Oracle, I'd like to welcome you to today's roundtable, Lowering Administrative Costs with Oracle BPM. We're lucky enough to have two presenters with us today, Peter Haas, Director of Technology for the Supreme Court of Louisiana, and Dan Tortorici, Director of Product Marketing at Oracle. Today we're going to be diving into an implementation of Oracle, as well as a sneak preview of the latest edition of Oracle, 10G R3. The Supreme Court of Louisiana implemented Oracle in order to provide secure and standardized workflow and collaboration services for their community of justices and staff and external legal community. And they were doing this all in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Following our presentation from Peter, Dan Tortorici will join us and give us a sneak preview of that product. And without further delay, I'd like to turn things over to Peter Haas. Among Peter's most recent and noteworthy accomplishments were the survival of Hurricane Katrina and getting the court's technology back online just 96 hours, I should say, after the storm. So, Peter, welcome, and I'll turn things over to you.
Hi, thank you very much, and welcome everyone. I think that the whole discussion about the tools, the Oracle tools that we put into place, particularly BPM, are probably can't be had without talking about Hurricane Katrina and the problems that we had dealing with it. And actually, as we get into this presentation, you'll see how Katrina was not a catalyst, but certainly showed us where we had some serious shortcomings in how we did business and our business processes, and most importantly, our data management and how we presented these tools to the staff and then ultimately to the public, and at the same time being able to do all that, but hardening those systems so that they were survivable for the next event. And as luck would have it, we got to play that game again this year. So it was a great test. Without further discussion, quickly the big things that we were going after were obviously consolidation and collaboration. You know, everything now is a collaboration. How to make multiple tools work better together, or multiple processes and functions work better together, and improve the output while at the same time streamlining the input from staff, or the number of iterations that staff are required to perform to get that output. So collaboration was a big thing, and how all these things supported the court mission. We'll talk about legal records. We're the Supreme Court, so obviously we're drowning in paper. It's a 200-year-old culture. The legal industry loves paper, and this helps us to manage the paper monster, if you will, while at the same time giving us the ability to move forward to a paperless environment, which is slow, but we're working our way toward that. Obviously, productivity. There were many processes that we had that were old and needed to be streamlined, and we really needed to sit down and see how we were going to do those things and how we were going to make it better. And again, what I was talking about earlier, some of those collaborative efforts, and at the same time tie our custom applications in to this process. And then finally, disaster recovery, a little lanyap there. For those of you who don't know what lanyap is, that's a baker's dozen, a little something extra. It's a Louisiana term, old French term. The biggest problem we have down here is we live 6 months out of the year with the threat of catastrophic hurricanes disrupting our lives. So everything we do, we have to consider disaster recovery. It's not for us. It's not that thing that sits on the back burner and bothers every business manager or every CIO or CTO or IT manager. It's something that we actively have to practice and work on, and it has to be involved in everything that we do every single day. So we'll talk about that as well, and some of the lessons that we learned through Katrina and Rita, and then most recently Gustav and I. They seem to come in pairs. I don't know why. Collaboration. This was a big thing for us. There's a lot of things that go on at the court, a lot of people working on a lot of different things, and That's one aspect. The other aspect is just the geography of the courthouse itself. The Supreme Court building down in the heart of the French Quarter takes up an entire city block and is 4 stories high. So you get enough exercise every day just walking from office to office. Trying to get all these processes or get these folks on the same page, the geography of the building alone made that a difficult task. So one of the ways that we got the employees to start talking to each other without picking up the phones all the time or posting things was we set up employee billboards or bulletin boards or whiteboards or whatever term we're giving them this week. And this was a great venue for the employees just to chat back and forth or talk about how the Saints are doing or there's been a change in this process or this policy. Court events, court calendars, things that are going on in the courthouse, another great tool. And collaboratively, everyone could access it, everyone could input information, and everyone could read it. Something as simple as traffic. Everybody has to fight the traffic monster every day. So we have things like that in there. Again, employee information, and this was a way to get the employees to use it, to get them acclimated, because it's very difficult when you introduce new tools. People tend to resist change, and they want to keep what they have. So this was a way to kind of get them into it, make it a little more interesting. And really of note with the traffic item, I mean, evacuation information. When they pull the trigger down here and you got 1 million people trying to get out of the way, it's something to see and experience. So the more information we can give them, the better. The more information we put in this tool, the better. Staff locators. We have a massive disaster recovery staff locator and information system in here that we have the information on virtually everything about the staff member and family, special needs, medications, anything that would be of real importance to that particular individual in those particular aspects. Calendars. The court lives and breathes on calendars and dockets. So we had a multitude of calendars. We're managed by a multitude of individuals. We consolidated all this information and put it into one venue and manage it through that one venue. So now, instead of having, if you need 2 rooms, instead of having to go to 4 different people to reserve these 2 rooms, you go to this one calendar location and you make your reservation. Very similar to what you would encounter if you, say, went to a hotel or even making a reservation for a tee time on a golf course. And while they sound very simple, a lot of the manual aspects that we've removed by doing these things has really made lives a lot easier, not only for the people that had to perform these tasks, but for the people that had to take part in these tasks. So it's really a huge difference. And then, of course, documents. As I mentioned before, we live and breathe on paper. We get 3,000 to 3,500 filings a year. And while that doesn't sound like a lot, a filing is not a single sheet of paper. We've seen them roll the filings in on hand trucks. It's all the information that has come through every single court before it gets to the Supreme Court. So it's a massive amount of information that has to be managed. And this tool allows us to do that, but at the same time, it also gives us the environment that we can begin moving toward the e-filing, the electronic filing, where we start doing away with the paper and everything is in a digital format. Why is that important? Well, it's important for obvious reasons. It makes it a little more green. We don't kill quite so many trees. But it also makes it easier for the attorneys, the judges, the law clerks to access the information instead of having to chase down a copy or make more copies of the copy of the filing. Now everyone can access a single document online. And we can tie it into our custom case management system. So that's a huge plus for us. And then, of course, the sharing of all these documents. Everybody, we get all these filings, and when we get these filings, then the end result is a production of reports and memorandums and information that are produced so that the judges can go through and review this information. And, of course, the ultimate or the end result of that is the opinion or the case opinion by each of the 7 justices. So all that information we can keep together collaboratively, and then everyone can access it. And then, of course, it all culminates on the docket if the case is actually is accepted by the court, and they say, yes, we believe there's a question of constitutionality here, or we want to hear this case, then it goes on the docket and is set up for oral arguments. And just to give you a kind of a mental picture there, 3,000, 3,500 cases get filed a year, we might hear 50 or 60 cases. Just like the U.S. Supreme Court, the bulk of the stuff that's filed is either the writs are denied because there isn't a constitutional question, or it is turned back to the lower courts for action. So it kind of gives you an idea of just how much is going on. Legal records, as I mentioned, 3,000 a year, and they come in from virtually all sources, not just the big, massive law firms, but we get them from lower courts, we get them from district attorneys' offices, we even get them from our guests at the Angola Hotel. They file on behalf of themselves, or they file on behalf of other inmates under what's called a pro se status. And all these have to get the same treatment. Just because it comes from the correctional institution doesn't mean it gets any less attention than something that's coming out of a $10 million a year law firm. Everything is treated equally, so in the system it has to be treated equally, obviously. The future for us is really e-filing. And to, without taking 4 hours to describe the process of filing a piece of paper over the counter, the e-filing is an amazingly complex process, and BPM is the heart and soul of that. It allows us to build the system so that where all the hurdles and all the triggers and all the trip hazards are in that process, we can not only manage those, but we can monitor them and look for the bottlenecks and where we have problems. So the automation of that process is amazingly complex. I mean, we spent probably 6 or 7 months alone just on that process. So it really took some time. But what it really does is it streamlines all this continued laborious paper machine that grinds on every day, and the stuff going in and being done by hand and accounted for, and then distributed in a paper state out to 8 or 10 offices. So it really does away with all of those old school processes, and then of course it allows everything to be viewed online. That's done. That even now, the paper stuff that still comes in as we begin to move into e-filing, we are scanning in so that it's in a digital format, and it allows us staff. So that's going to kind of create a digital bridge, if you will, between now and when the court says e-filing is mandatory and you must do it, which I'm sure is 3 to 5 years away for us. And of course, it gives us a great disaster recovery aspect, because what we learned during Katrina, everybody scattered to the four winds, and the court desperately tried to get back open as quickly as it could, but it couldn't because the paper was sitting where? On everybody's desk, and there wasn't any real digital format, and there wasn't any process to get it in. So that was one of those points that I mentioned early on, that Katrina really kind of drove home the need for these things. Productivity. The best example that I can give you, and I know everybody thinks about when they spend money, I know I do, what's the return on the investment? Where am I going to get the biggest bang for my buck? And how am I going to make things better while doing that? Because technology is expensive, and we all know that. So the best example of this is we had a process here where attorneys get what's called a certificate of good standing. What does that mean? You go to an attorney in Louisiana and you want to hire that attorney for whatever. Say you're going to have your will redone. You want to make sure that attorney is in fact a licensed and a lawfully practicing attorney in the state of Louisiana. You say, can you prove that? Well, they show you that their law license hanging on the wall. Well, that's nice, but they could have been disbarred 2 years ago. He's not hanging his disbarment notice on the wall, I'm sure. So you can ask for proof of that, and they come back to the Supreme Court, and we produce what's called a certificate of good standing. We essentially send them a notarized document from the clerk of court that says, yes, this attorney John Doe is practicing in good state in the state of Louisiana, and it has a seal on it, and it's signed by the clerk. Okay, all that said and done, we process anywhere from 300 to 600 of these monthly. We were doing all this by hand. And when I say by hand, somebody would pick up the phone and call into the clerk's office, and they would say, yes, I'm Attorney John Doe, and I need a certificate of good standing. Then they would have to go into the bar rolls, which is a database, into the back end, not even through a user interface, and start looking to make sure that this attorney had no disciplinary issues, had paid their dues, had been to their continual learning education sessions, had met all of the requirements And then they had to sit down and produce this document by hand, then sign it, and then again produce the envelope by hand and mail it out. We're talking almost a full day's work for an individual. I mean, I have on here 3 to 5 hours, but it was probably certainly more than that. Completely manual process. I mean, it was a dinosaur. So why did this thing come to the forefront? Well, most importantly, again, during Katrina, see, down here we have two lives, before Katrina and after Katrina. During Katrina, we had all these attorneys who had virtually lost everything. I mean, we'd all lost everything that we had. Now, that's all of our certifications, our diplomas, our licenses, everything that said who we are was gone. So we were getting thousands of requests. And keep in mind, we didn't have access to our systems like we did in the French Quarter because we were up in Baton Rouge. And how we managed this thing was Post-its on a wall. We were sticking Post-its on a wall with names and addresses, and that's how we were producing it. And I stood one day and looked at this at great length and went, my God, this is astonishing. And today's level of technology, now we're only talking 3 years ago, this is how we're managing this beast, and that really was the biggest catalyst to drive the train here. So what did we do? We sat down and we scrapped the entire manual process, and we put in an automated process where now an attorney can just go online and do it themselves and ask for a specific delivery method, whether they want to come and pick it up or they want it mailed. They enter their information. If the system automatically goes in and checks all of the bar information, if it clears all the wickets, it spits out the letter with the envelope and the address, and all the clerk has to do is walk it over to the clerk to seal it and have it signed, and we have since put the clerk's signature in, so now it comes out with his signature on it, and he doesn't have to go through all the pain of signing those, and the only thing the clerk that has to do, the only thing I can't automate is putting a seal on it, and we have actually looked at that. So we've taken this unbelievably horrible process and turned it into this automated process, which there is a great return on the investment there, and it's a great example because we've got a work savings of at least 2 to 4 hours a day, and that costs, that we're talking about $4,000 in lost productivity to the old process every month. So, and it's just, we're not talking about man hours alone, but we're talking about the resources as well. So that's a great example of really a big return on the investment. Being government, we don't see a lot of return on the investment, unlike corporate America. And that's why I think this is just a fabulous example of how the BPM tool allowed us to do that. Hurricane Katrina. No conversation about New Orleans can be had without talking about Katrina. I mentioned it a few times. We actually had to move to Baton Rouge, all our operations. I mean, and when I say move, I mean everything. And we immediately realized the need for consolidated tools and single sources for work products. The one I just mentioned was a great example of that. And then, of course, the integration of tools for both the internal customer, which is the staff and the judges, as well as the external customer, which are all those folks I mentioned previously, lawyers, lower courts, district attorneys' offices, even the inmate that's in the correctional institution. So how did we do this? Well, Katrina hit. We ended up moving the court to Baton Rouge. Everything that we knew to be true as far as traditional services stopped. The relocation itself was just unbelievable because everybody is relocating. So now government and private entities are looking for space. And we all know that government moves much slower than the private sector. So for those government folks out there, this is a little lagniappe here. You got to move quick when you're competing with corporate America at the same level because they're going to get there much quicker than you do. They're worried about that bottom figure, whereas in most cases, while we do worry about it, we don't have to. So it's a big issue with hardware and staff. We didn't have a central tool that the dislocated staff could use, and this was the same problem with our external staff. There was no way to manage. We're trying to manage multiple tools that are scattered all over the state, and we had clients. I mean, we had staff installing security clients on public machines, family machines. Aunt Tilly's machine, who's an old Windows 95 that hasn't been updated since Windows 95 came out. I mean, it was an absolute mess. So all the things there, again, we talk about, trying to consolidate and be greener and do the right things, it was really important at that point to take a hard look at all these processes and bring them together into one consolidated system, and do away with all the overhead. The problem with clients and overhead is just that. It's a problem. Web-based, web-based, web-based. I'm a firm believer in it now. Somebody logs into, they're at the local library. As long as they can get to a browser, they can get into their tools now. So that's really a big plus. So how did all this, after Katrina, how did these tools help us? Well, the obvious, easy management, single sign-on. There's no client. It's web-based. You sign on, you're in. It was much easier to cross-train the technical staff on something that they all recognize, just like it was easy to train the staff in general. It's a web browser. So by building the back end and using BPM and then tying it all to a web-based front end, that was really where the rubber met the road right there. I mean, we had all this great detailed work on the back end with the business process and getting the processes in and consolidating them all and using BPM to make them all flow and work together. But the true test of that was putting it in, getting those web systems running so that the staff could actually use them, and that was really where we really got our biggest bang for the buck. And then, of course, one-stop shopping. Instead of having to go to 2 or 3 different places to get information, and then the individual consolidates that information, they can go to one location and get it. It's there. They pull it all together, and they're off to the races. And it makes it much easier for the staff, but it also makes it easier for the external customer. Again, that lawyer, that law clerk, or even that legal secretary, providing them the access so that we could keep functioning, and that they can keep functioning. Because the reality is, when something happens here, it doesn't happen in the whole state or the whole country. So we have to stay up. This was really the biggest thing, was the whole system. It services everyone. We can have everybody working out of the same system. It has the security in place that works well, particularly with the BPM tool, because you can adopt the business flows, the business processes, as they cross from the public to the internal, or vice versa, from the internal to the public. So it's really a great thing, and the collaborative part, because it is dual-hatted, makes it even better. So you put that core calendar out there, you have both the public and the internal staff accessing the same thing. So obviously there's a mountain of security between the two. I mean, you essentially have a concrete wall between them, and it's using the embedded security as well as the fact that it's Active Directory aware. It really allows for a great latitude as far as a multi-use system, which is what is just a big plus for us. And it's web-based. I can't say enough about the fact that the whole system overall is web-based, and everybody knows a web browser. There's no real training. They know the navigation of a web browser, and it's just learning that particular site. So what does all of that mean to us? Really, the employment of the tools gave the court the ability to move forward. What does that mean? I mean, we consolidate our tools, and now we're moving to the next level, which of course is doing away with the paper and putting in the touchscreen mentality and having less overhead from both the technical side, but as well as the business side. And that's really always been our goal here. If we can streamline what the business side does and manage those processes and give the managers of the business side the ability to come back to us and say, we want to change this business process, we can go in and change the technical side to drive that change in the business process. And that's really, really important, because once again, people tend to balk at change, and it makes it a lot easier for us to do that. Of course, it gives us a big leg up on business continuity, which for us is very important. For most people, it should be important, but most people don't have the threats that we do. Clientless tools, web browsers, I can't say enough about it. No learning curve, and it just limits the problems you have with clients. So if you can do it, it's absolutely the way to go. And it really, just BPM is a major player in all of our application development. Anytime we're going to do something, the first thing we do is how do we employ BPM and get it into the play so that we can minimize a lot of the management overhead, if you will, from the old days of software and processes, and how do we tie these things together and how do we make these things work. It seems to do away with all of those and makes it much easier for us as a technical staff to provide the business side of the court with the things they need, but being able to do that in a way that we have followed the process that they've asked for, or in some cases that the law requires that they have to follow. So it really makes it a lot easier in doing that. So that's pretty much it for me. I would be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
All right, Peter, thank you very much. Well, I have to tell you, the number one request we always get at BPM Institute is that our members and the community are always looking to hear how other folks on the enterprise have been able to implement BPM, both as a methodology and a technology at their firm to be more efficient and go down the path of continuous process improvement. So thanks for doing a great job of laying out how you were able to apply that to the court system. And certainly, Katrina was and continues to be quite an ordeal for folks down in Louisiana. And so we certainly appreciate you coming in, talking to us about that. And if you can hang on for us for a little bit following Dan's presentation, then we've got some questions we'd like to come back to you with.
Yeah.
And so without further delay, I'd like to turn things over to Dan Tortorici.
Good morning. This is Dan Tortorici, and pleasure to talk to you about our new Oracle BPM release this morning. So let's get started. A few words, basically, a disclaimer about our product direction, which I'm sure you've seen before. Let's talk a little bit more about what we're going to cover here. Essentially, we'll talk a little bit about our product from an overview of where we stand with the product. We'll talk about our release themes, the new features that really map to those release themes, and then we'll close with a few final thoughts. So let's continue with a little bit of an overview. When you take a look at Oracle's BPM product portfolio, what you'll see are essentially two suites. The Oracle BPM suite, which is really targeted at human and system-centric BPM, along with SOA interaction, number of capabilities that all provides, essentially everything you need to really map to many of your process challenges that you'd be looking at. And then also Oracle BPA suite, which is really focused on high-level methodology-driven process modeling and analysis, so things like Six Sigma and Lean sort of methodologies, if you will. So two products in the product portfolio, and what we're going to focus on today is a part of basically Oracle BPM suite. As you see here, a number of components within that. Oracle BPM, which is really the focus of our few thoughts this morning, along then with BPEL, BAM, Business Rules, and then Web Center Suite, which is licensed essentially for users that interact with those processes as well. So Oracle BPM Suite. As I mentioned, BPM is our focus, so we'll take a look at what's inside of that. And what you see here are a number of the tools, essentially tools that map to all of the audiences that are involved in both designing, modeling, creating, interacting, monitoring, and as part of the whole process life cycle, if you will. And we'll talk about some of these tools and certainly about what's new. On the right here, you can see some screen images of the modeling environment at the top, which is the Studio tool, and then essentially two screenshots of tools that are really for user interaction. One, which is the workspace, which is essentially a web-based tool for anyone interacting with processes. And then those same capabilities available in a portal, a metaphor, in the lower image, so working in conjunction with Web Center Interaction, providing those user interaction components via the portal. Okay, so that's sort of the product suite at a high level. Well, let's talk a little bit about this release. There were a number of themes, basically, in this release that really were around two major axes here. One was the productivity and ease of use side of things, making it easier, as you can see here, for all the participants, end users, business analysts, and IT ops and developers. Also, in addition, what we've done is done quite a bit of work around the architecture, enhancing it, increasing performance, making it easier to configure, et cetera, and improving the interoperability in an SOA environment. So we feel we've got a pretty solid release with lots of great capabilities that, as you can see from the overlay, map to all the major audiences that are part of the process lifecycle. Okay, so let's start basically with that first set of themes, if you will, around productivity and ease of use. One of the key components is a redesigned workspace. As I mentioned, this is the web-based tool basically for anyone that interacts with the process. And what was key here is that we used a pretty extensive usability study to look at how the workspace was used and streamline the tasks basically that users had working with the tool. So that was really, quite enlightening and led to many changes, basically, to simplify the whole user interface for business users. So now there's, layouts that basically provide some flexibility in how things are arranged. There's a new chart panel that, provides for process status, understanding where things are, and the ability to include dashboard widgets, which provide interaction with other panels in the workspace. And also, as part of this, we've made sort of the input and export a little easier with a list of processes that can be exported in a number of different formats here, both PDF and comma-separated value files. So workspace is a big component that a lot of users basically interact with, if only on a casual basis. But we've done a lot to really make it simpler across the board. Also, for end users, what we've done is a bit more integration with Microsoft tools. Here, Microsoft Office 2007, for example, integrating it into the ribbon at the top of the interface. So now you can, for example, from a document, initiate a process that includes that document. All right, so sort of process initiation from Microsoft Office, if you will, and then also status of processes via RSS feeds, which can be fed both into Outlook, if you'd like, or for that matter, into Microsoft SharePoint. So again, making it easier for users that interact with processes at any level that they may be a participant. Sort of the next stage of things that really applies to business analysts is all around basically the modeling environment, BPM Studio, that we talked a little bit about earlier. So we've improved basically our standards compliant rendering with BPMN 2.0. We've also added some horizontal layouts that you see in the diagram on the right. So the lanes of interaction, if you will, that represent different process participants can be horizontal rather than just vertical. Also, a new timer activity has been added so that we can accommodate time triggers so that processes can happen at a particular time later in the schedule, if you will. We've also improved our BPA interoperability, and this is with the business process suite, the BPA suite that we mentioned earlier. So we can basically import processes from that tool and bring them into BPM Studio and work on them and have them execute basically through the whole BPM product set of capabilities. So along with that, again, some better standard support, and then also some intelligence about the import process so that those processes lay out in a much more readable way automatically. So there's less manual work that has to be done upon bringing them in. So some great modeling capabilities that have been added here. Also, in terms of composing and working on the processes, there was some new improvements to what we call the presentation editor, and that's really the tool which is now what you see is what you can get drag and drop editor for building the interfaces that processes will have as they interact with different users. So a lot easier to create those basically with the new editor. Plus, we've also improved how we can collaborate with various process participants here through the use of templates and the role library so that we can basically share best practices, reduce redundancy, and have a common catalog that basically supports different processes and inheritance so that we're making basically it simpler over time to use processes and to use the best practices that we've developed for, let's say, our particular enterprise. So a bit of collaboration improvements along with a much improved editor for designing interfaces. And then we've also increased some of our capabilities around business rules. And specifically in the workspace, now the auditing information is available and quite complete directly in the workspace. We've also basically improved how we're versioning rules for the process administrator, which is really the monitoring tool that we'll talk about. Done a bit of work for documentation, which is always a good thing. And I think most interestingly, we've also added a new operator to provide a bit more flexibility in rules. So now there's a between operator that enables essentially creating rules that perhaps are a bit more complex than what analysts have been able to do before. So some improvements here to our business rules capability. All right, so those are the capabilities and features, if you will, that we've done to improve both user productivity and ultimately ease of use for all participants. Now let's take a look at what we've done to enhance the architecture and also increase interoperability in a services-oriented architecture environment. So a great improvement here that really applies not only to the monitoring and managing folks, but even to end users, is the fact that we can now federate basically all instances in one end user application. So what this means is that a workspace, right, which is the web-based tool we talked about before, which any process participant might use to monitor processes or enter information in their step in the process, can be connected to a number of different instances of Oracle BPM so that essentially any processes that relate to them are all aggregated in this one end user application. Simplifies things, particularly where many projects are deployed within the organization. Okay, we've also then done a bit to simplify basically configuring the hybrid LDAP provider for directory integration. So improvements basically around how we're handling the plugin. And this has direct impact basically on how BPM integrates and works with our Web Center interaction portal organization capabilities, previously known as Aqualogic User Interaction. And this also has impact and improvements with Novell eDirectory and certainly IBM Tivoli. And then lastly, small but clearly very helpful improvement is that the mail queue size now can be easily configured. So those are things basically that we've done for management for the most part. We've also then simplified how the domain configuration gets set up when you're essentially installing a new instance of Oracle BPM. And certainly when you look at basically rolling out BPM, the configuration is a key part of setting it up right and getting it done quickly so that you can move forward. So we've simplified that with a bit more of a wizard-based interface that leads users through creating that. And as we most normally do, we've also increased some security components basically in this release, specifically improving the security working with WebLogic Server so that WebLogic Server security is essentially handled automatically for a BPM. And then, essentially creating more support basically for building flexible security options here, whether it's through token sharing or through basically support for JMS messaging for that matter. So administrators will certainly like those improvements as well as the security experts as well. Small, but certainly not least, we've also improved the capability to both debug and monitor what's happening within the process execution engine with improved debugging and more detailed log, tracing, if you will. So this will help to, understand what's going on and basically work through any troubleshooting areas a bit easier. As you might expect, basically with any release, we also look to improve performance, and we've done a bit of that basically optimizing the interaction of processes with the database engine. And it's certainly something that's configurable, but it certainly can help improve quite a bit the performance that you're seeing. We've also added quite a bit of improvements to the APIs that the developers will certainly appreciate. We talked before about being able to initiate a process from a document in Microsoft Office or Word for that matter. Well, the support for that is what you see here, essentially, the ability to add attachments, enabling kicking off a process or just attaching a document, if you will, to the process. Also improved exception handling around web services and improved basically the ability to have processes interoperate in a loosely coupled environment, which is really what services-oriented architecture is all about. Okay. One other brand new capability that we've added here is centers around user activity streams. And this is something that can tie nicely into basically some of the Web 2.0 or Enterprise 2.0 thoughts around community. So the ability essentially to update via a stream of events what a user is doing in particular around processes. Certainly helpful for a team when they may be working on processes together or trying to coordinate a large-scale project across a number of groups. So activity streams, something new for this release. With regard to standards, we've also moved up a little bit here with support now. The Studio component that we talked about before is now running in Eclipse 3.3. This certainly helps some stability and performance as well. We've also provided now out-of-the-box plugins for source code management for both CVS and Subversion as well. In addition, we've also added some new support for Sybase, and so that's helpful basically for other databases being used. And we've also done quite a bit really to work with improving our interoperability, as I mentioned earlier, with services-oriented architecture environments. So we have certified with the latest release of the Service Bus, which is still known as Aqualogic Service Bus 3.0. We've also simplified both process publishing to the Service Bus and process subscription, enabling basically one-click to make this happen. So we feel that'll really help process interaction in an SOA environment become something that's very simple to do. Once again, some improvements with regard to security that apply here in the SOA world. And we've also then done a bit to increase performance in this environment by including a custom transport for service bus that enables essentially better performance when both are co-deployed in the same instance. And lastly, just a general improvement around interoperability with BPM via web services. So now both Oracle BPM and BPM can work together more easily in the same environment. And then lastly, I believe here we have some improvements that tie towards, again, the user side of things that with regard to the portal environments, right? So Web Center Suite essentially providing the host portal environments that we can host portlets that relate to instances and processes being in various states. Now, essentially, what we're supporting is the upgraded products that are components in those environments. So, known now as Web Center Interaction, but the current shipping version here of Aqualogic User Interaction 6.5 and Aqualogic Interaction Collaboration 4.5, both basically being supportive. We've also, as I mentioned, I believe earlier, supporting the new directory services here that the portal uses. And then for WebLogic Portal, we've simplified the whole deployment process, making it simpler to deploy BPM portlets and things in a portal using basically the standard technologies that WebLogic Server offers for library modules. And then lastly, as you might expect, we talked about workspace improvements for usability. Certainly these have been rolled into the portlets as well, so that those improvements are available no matter what interface you choose to basically have users interact with. So that's sort of the wrap on the two areas that we've done quite a bit of work in for this release, and we hope that you'll get a lot of benefit out of. We really believe that we've been able to increase productivity and ease of use, certainly with that redefined user interface we mentioned, and then improvements across the board that simplify tasks for all process participants, whether they're end users, business analysts, or IT operations. And then lastly, once again, just to reemphasize that we've done quite a bit of work in this release, we believe, around enhancing the architecture so that it improves the robustness and performance and management capabilities, as well as provides a much better environment to work with business processes in coordination with services-oriented architecture.
All right, great, Dan. Well, thank you for giving our folks a sneak preview. I know this is a recent release, and we have a lot of folks within the community that use Oracle and also may have been BEA clients as well, and so appreciate you giving us kind of a sneak preview of 10GR3. I've got a host of questions for yourself and Peter that I've divided up. So Peter, are you still with us?
I sure am.
All right, great. Well, maybe we'll serve these up back and forth between some of the experiences you had on the implementation, and then Dan, I'll come back to you on a couple of specific questions on the tools. So Peter, the number one question we get almost all the time is helping explain folks what were the challenges that you had in implementing BPM successfully, and how were you able to overcome those?
I think the biggest, or certainly was for me, and I'm sure everybody else, is getting the executive level buy-in. If you can't get the boss to buy in, then certainly you don't get the funding to move ahead on the project, nor do you get the resources, the staff, and whatever. So I would say that's probably the biggest hurdle or the biggest issue. how we overcame that was, well, I was lucky in that, I can't believe I'm going to say this, I was lucky in that I had Katrina. Because it really highlighted a lot of the shortcomings that we had, and I was able to, while it was going on, illuminate these even more so. I don't know how you could get more illuminated than that. And that was really helpful. But at the same time, by showing some return on the investment initially, I think that's really the big thing. If you talk the savings in resources and the savings of good old-fashioned dollars and cents, you quickly get the boss's attention. Can he get, more output from a single employee, or can he save, $10,000 in lost output because of poor process management, business process management, or the tools are poorly managed. I think that's really the big key right there. And you can do the old-fashioned death by PowerPoint, put all kinds of slides up and this and that and this and that. But what helped us is we actually demonstrated it. We got it, and of course now I'm going back a few years here at least. Demonstrated the software and how it would perform these different functions, and that really was I think our biggest help was we had something we could show them.
All right, great. And can you also tell us at what level within the organization did that executive level sponsor take place at?
It went all the way to the Chief Justice. Because of the, again, we're state government, so because of the size of the expenditure, but more importantly, because it was just such a big change for the court, it went to the highest levels and through all the levels. So, even department heads, because we were going to change the way they did business, and we absolutely wanted to make sure that we got their buy-in, because without their buy-in, they're also talking to the management and leadership, saying, yeah, hey, we should really do this, or no, we don't want to do this. We think it's a bad idea. So it was really critical to get their buy-in as well.
Right. All right, fantastic. Well, we appreciate you sharing that with us. So now, given the experiences that you had now implementing and getting BPM throughout the organization, are there any recommendations that you would give some of our members on the types of processes that they should look to or to start with in order to start off successfully?
The obvious, you want to go after, certainly go after the low-hanging fruit, because it does a couple things for you. One, it allows your development folks to get their feet wet without really impacting major business aspects. At the same time, it allows you to take advantage of some of those smaller, really not that significant tools or processes that are going on within the business that you can change easily. And typically, what we discovered is most of those low-hanging fruit are the ones that haven't been updated, for eons, and people are still using pens and paper in some cases to take care of these tasks. It's the old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So of course, the big important item that you work on every day for us, our case management system. It gets attention all day, but something as small as the meeting minutes for a judge's office. That's something that the secretary does very low hanging. For us, it was a very low hanging fruit. We kind of took advantage of that. Plus, as you begin to work on those things, you kind of catch people's attention. They're able to look at it and say, wow, that's pretty cool. That does work well. And then it kind of broadens the scope, and you get more people on board.
All right, great. Well, Dan, I think that's a good segue to come back to you. I know a couple of the big objectives for the new release was to ease development and deployment and enable more collaboration and empower the end users. Given all the multiple things you talked about in the release, which do you think will have the most impact on, for folks on the end user side?
Yeah, good question. I think it's really a couple of things. One is sort of, in a word, usability. And number two, in a word, SOA. So when you look at all the improvements that we've done to make the process interaction more usable across the spectrum of users, if you will, from analysts to administrators to developers to casual end users, I think it really brings home a lot of simplification and streamlining to make it just that easier to use, which is a great sort of boost to achieving success more easily. So I think clearly usability, guided by the study that we did with the workspace on through really everything we've done, including the federated capability to look at all processes from one user console, if you will. So that's one. The second, as I mentioned, SOA. I think we've done some major work there that really makes the product interoperate more easily, right? So get it up and running within an SOA environment, and certainly to leverage the flexibility that SOA provides on the IT side. So, we're really, I think, delivering more impacts with, greater agility, certainly through BPM on the business side, and then coupling that with the flexibility that SOA provides on the IT side much more easily.
All right, great. And Peter, in the time we have left, I'll come back to you, and then I maybe have one more I can squeeze in for Dan. But given the success that you guys have had, and now the capabilities you have in hand now, can you share with us about some of the processes you may be looking at to implement down the line or in the near future?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, e-filing is our next big hurdle. But beyond that, we're looking at a system, actually two systems. One specifically for the justices, where they would be able to log into a work center, if you will, and everything that's going on in their office, the cases that are being researched in their office, the cases that they have to vote on, and they would actually be able to vote online as well. It's kind of a dashboard of everything in their world for their particular office, because a lot goes on, and it's very difficult for them to manage all that stuff going on. And right now they're using not the older sources of management, but Outlook calendars and that kind of stuff. So we kind of want to take that same mentality or that same approach we use for the court and then tailor it down to the individual justice's office. We're also looking at a virtual court system for anyone that wants to log in. So instead of having to pick up the phone or come to the court to find out a piece of information, you would log into a virtual court and be able to query our case management system and find out what's going on with this particular case, or do legal research, or find out what's going on at the court, look at calendars and those kind of things. So I guess expanding the scope for the external customer.
All right, great. Well, we certainly wish you a lot of luck with that, Peter, and then maybe you can keep us updated as things progress. One of the big themes the Institute's been hitting on this year is that, for those organizations that are looking to commit to continuous process improvement, they really need to rely on a BPMS in order to make that commitment. And glad to see that you guys have done that. Well, Dan, I'm going to come back and let you have the last word for the day. And we appreciate everything you've told us about this release, but can you give our community just a bit of a long-term view on how this fits into Oracle's overall strategy in the BPM space?
Sure. Yeah, this release really, I think, is great in that it's the first step, right, in the roadmap, basically, that we set out in June. And so this shows really Oracle's commitment to that product strategy. And what's nice is I believe it really delivers benefits important to both existing customers and enterprises, as well as those that are considering BPM Suite. So in just 100 days, we've been able to bring this release about and provide the interoperability, increased interoperability, if you will, with other parts of Oracle Fusion middleware. And that's certainly the goal that we set out for our strategy, and we'll continue to develop as we move forward. So this is step one, and we're marching down the road, basically, that we set out a number of months ago. And I think we will have increasing benefits as we move to various places along that path.
All right, fantastic. Well, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you both for bringing your expertise to our community today. Peter Haas, Director of Technology with the Supreme Court of Louisiana, and Dan Tortorici, Director of Product Marketing for Oracle's BPM Suite. I'd like to thank you both, and I'd like to thank the folks for Oracle for hosting this. And for all of our members, we'd like to thank you very much for your time. We look forward to hosting you at a roundtable in the near future. And then for you, those of you on the Northeast or the East Coast, we look forward to seeing you in New York City, November 4 through 7. Thank you all very much for your time.